In this next section, we'll be looking at coping versus thriving. By coping, we mean dealing with a difficult situation. This means making it go away, tolerating it, putting out the fire. By thriving, we mean growing as a person. This might mean becoming more mature, becoming better equipped for life. It might mean having a clearer sense of what's really important to you. In psychology, we call this post-traumatic growth. There are a number of skills that can help us grow. One of these is understanding that failure is a beginning, not an end, where failure can be understood as feedback to help us change. Another skill is making use of constructive self-disclosure. This means opening up to people that you trust in a way that is useful and helpful to you. A further skill is knowing ways to reduce anxiety and manage negative thoughts and beliefs. It's also important to know your own personal strengths, and finally, to be aware of your personal values or spiritual beliefs. Let's look at each of these in turn. Firstly, failure can be seen as beginning, not as an end. Through social media, we've been exposed to a form of perfection unlike we've seen before. And as a result, many of us put ourselves up to impossible standards. With only a partial view of reality, when we face failure, we believe that we're alone in experiencing this failure. We assume, therefore, that not only are we less than perfect, but that we're ultimately flawed and that we aren't good enough as individuals. As a result, we can end up comparing ourselves to others. And how do we change this? Well, the first thing to recognize is that, especially through social media, we are seeing the very best of them. We're not seeing the average, regular, everyday side of the individual. We're seeing an enhanced version of them. Secondly, we can recognize that failure is an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity to try something new. It's sometimes a new way to achieve an old result. When we see it as the beginning rather than an end, we naturally react differently to that failure, and we start to see how we can change our behavior or what we've been doing so far so that we can achieve a new result. As Thomas A. Edison said, "I've not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Another way to become more conscious of your own thriving process is to become aware of how the physiological system of anxiety works. And this starts with the amygdala. The amygdala is a set of small clusters that are near the base of the brain, and they're responsible for triggering the fight or flight response in your body by setting off a chain reaction of anxiety. Understanding the cycle of anxiety allows you to become conscious of when you're experiencing the cycle within yourself. And from here, we can start to break it by acting differently. And the cycle starts with the catalyst, the trigger situation that starts you feeling anxious. The amygdala therefore reacts, and your body starts sending round hormones and your heart starts beating faster. This affects your blood sugar, and as a result, you might start shaking, you might get a pounding heart, you might flush, your breathing rate increases, and your chest might ache. These physiological reactions then become the new catalyst, because as you start feeling anxious, you become more anxious. The goal of the amygdala is to keep you safe. The amygdala doesn't think about what's going on, it's just there to react, it's automatic. The amygdala has an emotional memory that remembers triggers in the past that it will repeat the same behavior in the present. For example, if someone has experienced a cheating partner in the past, they may be more sensitive or may be more triggered by current behavior that may suggest a cheating partner in the present. The good news is that we can retrain the amygdala. Exposure therapy does just this, and we're able to treat anxiety disorders and phobias by exposing the individual to the anxiety-producing thoughts or memories. In this way, they're able to reintegrate the emotions that may have been suppressed. This is an exercise that you can experiment with for yourself, where you can put yourself in a situation where you're going to face your phobia at its worst. Someone will be there with you to guide you, maybe a friend, maybe a therapist. And they'll be there to offer you some reassurance whilst you go through the process. The conditions will be controlled, And you'll also be able to use psychologically proven relaxation techniques whilst you're in this situation, in order to attempt to replace your fear with thoughts of relaxation in the process. Let's take, for example, that you've been bitten by a dog, and you're now scared of dogs. You would slowly start to imagine a dog. And you would observe your reactions. Then you would imagine touching a dog, touching a puppy, then a dog. And eventually you might go and visit a dog in a pound where it's locked up, and after that you might proceed to touch a real dog. By exposing yourself to the situation that you fear, you can start to face that fear. See that maybe it's not as bad as you expected or as bad as you remembered, and use relaxation techniques until you're no longer scared of that situation. The advantage of this exercise is that it's quite quick, and it will give you the tools you need to handle the fear so that you can start thriving in your current situation. There are a few ways that we can help keep the amygdala calm. One of these ways is by decreasing the stresses in our life that we can control. Another way might be learning how to cultivate a healthier body and mind through exercise and healthy eating. Getting organised is a great way of helping to keep the amygdala calm. Disorganisation and chaos can bring in lots of stressors, as we don't really know what's going on and we feel uncertain about what's coming up next. It can naturally keep us on the edge. So keeping organised can help. Finally, we can create routines that help us create stability, countering any anxiety and helping us deal with unexpected situations. There are a few things that we can do to help keep the amygdala calm. We can start by decreasing the stresses in our lives, the ones that we can control. We can learn how to cultivate a better and healthier body and mind through regular exercise and healthy eating. We can get organised. Disorganisation and chaos can bring lots of stress with uncertainty and leaving us a little bit on edge. We can create routines. By creating stability, we can help counter some of the anxiety and again make sure that we're able to deal with anything that's unexpected. We can also help the amygdala stay calm by scheduling in some free time. This means taking a breather and just concentrating on your own needs. We can also do this by meditating. By clearing our heads of everything, we can reduce stress. Disciplining our thinking can also help us reduce any negative thoughts and helping us stay aware of what triggers are leading us to anxious feelings. And then there are those really basic things that we all know are really useful for us, but we don't always do. For example, sleeping more, preferably 8 to 9 hours. By picking out a bedtime, we can then stick to it and the body starts to learn when it's time to shut down. We can help it do this by avoiding caffeine and keeping the lights low at nighttime. And finally, we can eat well. As we all know, a healthy diet helps promote a healthy body, and this can really help when anxiety is high. Combined with good physical exercise, this can make it easier to cope with any issues that life may throw at us. Our next topic is on understanding your inner resources, because one big issue that could stop you from being resilient and gaining your own self-confidence is not truly understanding all the inner resources that you have. We can spend so much time being busy comparing ourselves to others that it can be really hard to understand that we have our own unique opinions, talents, skills and strengths, and more. And this can really help us stand out from the crowd. So first we're going to look at the inner observer. And this is the side of you that purely observes things that are going on around you and within you, without judgment. You can look at the situation without labeling something as right or wrong, good or bad, without getting upset, and without any type of reaction. Remember when we did the mindfulness exercise? Well, practicing mindfulness and meditation are great exercises to help you stay awake and present in each moment, helping you stay curious and open to what's going on within. It's the job of your inner observer to really pay attention to the kinds of sensations, feelings, and thoughts that you're having in every moment. It's important to start recognizing the inner speech. This is the little voice that everyone hears in their head. you can start to pay attention to the words that this voice uses, the tone that you use, and how loud you're talking. The first thing to notice is how your talking sounds, and then ask if it's useful or if it's even helping us reach our goals. So next time you hear that little voice talking to you, take a moment to notice not only what it's saying, but also how it's saying these things. If you talked in the same way to someone, say a friend, how would they respond? You're able to modify this inner speech simply by actively noticing it and then making the choice to change the way you talk to yourself. Finally, there is the inner coach. This is the part that's responsible for reminding you of your mindset and your attitude. It's the wise part that we all have, and it's going to help open up some new perspectives that help you focus more on solutions rather than problems. It's important to ask open-ended questions, ones that don't come with simple yes or no answers, but questions that start with how and why and what, such as, how can I do better? What do I want to create? And how am I going to do it? So as we've said, it can be easy to forget about the resources that we have available to us. So we can start making a list. We can look at what are my key strengths. These can be your qualities. What do you do well? What do your friends praise you for? What strategies can I use? These might be good habits or proactive approaches. You might have backup plans. What resources do I have available? And these could be social resources like contacts or people around you who can help, financial resources, or specific skills that you have to help you move forwards. And finally, what insights do I have? Where do you go for inspiration? As an exercise, see if you can start incorporating the inner observer, the inner speech, and the inner coach into your daily life. Before doing anything else, see what this inner coach or this wise part of you would say or suggest. Always remember your list of resources and remember to use them whenever things get a little bit overwhelming. We're now going to explore acceptance and self-acceptance. We all have the little voice inside our heads that tells us we're not good enough, we're not important, or maybe that no one likes us. And we call this the inner critic. And no matter how much evidence we have to the contrary, we're likely to continue believing this inner critic. Those of us who are not resilient or who are dealing with low self-esteem or depression have an inner critic that might be harsher or more vocal than the average person. The inner critic will blame you for things that are not going right, even if it's not our fault. It'll compare us to others all the time. It'll set up really high standards, and then when we don't meet them, it'll beat us up for all those little mistakes. It might hold on to a record of our failures, and it pays no attention to our accomplishments or our strengths. It might frequently call us names, like fat, ugly, incompetent, not good enough. Or it'll try to convince you what others are thinking, and they're always bad things. It might exaggerate all our weaknesses, and it's often believed regardless of how false, distorted, or negative the information actually is. It takes our self-esteem by judging, finding faults, and blaming. Unconditional self-acceptance is about separating who you are from what you do. As a fallible human being, we can accept that, like everyone else, we are less than perfect. This means that sometimes we'll perform well, and sometimes we might fail. And when we do perform well, we can take pride in it, but we can recognize that it also doesn't define us. At the same time, when we act badly, we can criticize our actions practically, but we can stubbornly refuse to criticize who we truly are, and to always unconditionally accept ourselves without judgment. As an exercise, name 2 situations in which you tend to judge your whole self. What could you tell yourself in these 2 situations to help you unconditionally accept yourself, despite any mistakes that you might make or any flaws that you possess? When you've done that, let's look at how we can start making a commitment to spend time drawing a distinction between yourself and your performances. Remind yourself at these times not to judge yourself, either as good or bad. As a second exercise, make a commitment to start spending time drawing a distinction between yourself and your actions. Remind yourself in these times not to judge yourself either as good or bad, but just to make a note of your behaviour and your actions, and to start changing them if that feels comfortable. Again, not from a space of judgment, but from a space of development. You can also practice applying unconditional self-acceptance to others. This might mean examining their behaviour, not judging it. We might not agree or disagree with the things that they do, but instead we can just hold back from making any judgments about their character or who they are as a whole person. This is unconditional other acceptance. Finally, identify one person, maybe a friend or a family member, who you could talk to about what unconditional self-acceptance is. Plan where and when you could meet this person to explain it to them. Teaching others is the best way to start learning something for ourselves. Sometimes it doesn't matter how hard we try to silence the inner critic, there'll still be times when it pops up and makes us question almost everything. An alternative is to see this critic as a way to improve ourselves. We can use this voice to propel us forwards. It can become our own personal coach as someone giving us feedback. Let's reflect back to the value work we did earlier in the course. If your inner critic loves droning on about what you eat and how you look, it might be that your value is in health and fitness. So we can use the inner critic as an opportunity to recognize our values and start working towards them. We're next going to look at radical acceptance. And this is less about the inner dialogue and more about how we deal with situations that are completely out of our control. Sometimes in our lives we might say things like, I can't stand this, this isn't fair, this can't be true, it shouldn't be this way, or why me? It's almost as if we think that refusing to accept the truth will keep it from being true. But accepting reality is difficult when life is painful. No one wants to experience pain, disappointment, sadness, or loss, but somehow those experiences are still part of life. When we attempt to avoid or resist those emotions, we add suffering to the pain that we're already experiencing. We make the emotion bigger with our thoughts or create more misery by using energy to attempt to avoid the painful emotion. And we can stop suffering by practicing acceptance. Radical acceptance means completely and totally accepting something wholeheartedly, not just intellectually, but emotionally. Accepting doesn't mean that you agree with it. It doesn't mean that you start to like it. It doesn't mean that it will change. But it does free us from the unnecessary struggle, the waste of energy in trying to avoid it. For a period of time, you accept reality exactly as it is, not as we think it should be or the way we'd like it to be. And this in itself can be liberating. Let's practice this now. Take a few deep breaths and think of something difficult in your life right now. After a couple of breaths, say in your next in-breath, I don't like this. While you exhale, say, I can't control it. And as you breathe again, say, I accept it. Keep repeating these words until it starts to feel more comfortable. Our next topic is discomfort and uncertainty. None of us like uncertainty. That's why we purchase insurance, go to the doctor, and start a retirement plan early. But no matter what, there are going to be times when uncertainty will appear. And it's important to learn not only how to handle uncertainty, but also how to prepare for it. And this is a fundamental part of being resilient. The act of growing comes with accepting new challenges, which means stepping into the unknown and feeling uncomfortable. Not knowing how to manage discomfort leads to intense frustration. And this underlies many mental health problems, especially anxiety conditions such as panic attacks and phobias. There are also strong links between frustration and most addictions. But if you want to become more resilient and you want a chance to try something new, to really pursue your passions and to really flourish, then you need to learn how to welcome discomfort and the uncertainty that sometimes comes with life. Think about some of the people you think are successful or have reached their dreams. What uncertainty or discomfort do you imagine that they've had to face in their lives? In today's society, discomfort is regarded as something not to be tolerated, something that should be avoided at all costs. Increasingly prevalent is the belief that everything should be instant. Instant gratification is the idea that I should get what I want when I want it, preferably now. Remember that sometimes a little bit of pain can mean a lifetime of gain. When we have a clear sense of life direction and what our values are, we can become more accepting of the discomfort we might experience in the present moment in the service of something bigger. For example, athletes will prepare for a competition. There'll be challenges in being a parent, and there's hardship in setting up a business now for rewards in the future. A low frustration tolerance is a major block in our emotional growth. Often the situation is not that bad, but we have convinced ourselves that it's too much, too difficult, or unbearable. Some of the typical low frustration tolerance thoughts might include, it's too hard, I can't stand it, or will this ever end? When one of those thoughts shows up, we can actually make room for the thought. By not acting impulsively, by sitting with the thought and the frustration, we can start to analyze it. For example, when something like, I can't stand this anymore, shows up, we can ask, what's the long-term goal? What am I really trying to achieve? What kind of discomfort am I trying to get rid of? Is my behavior helping, or is it actually making things worse? Have I faced this issue in the past, and how did I cope with it last time? And is there anything I can do to change this for the future? By making room for these feelings and thoughts and dividing them into manageable chunks, we can start to handle a situation that at first seemed unmanageable. The more we learn to live with this uncertainty and the discomfort that this might bring, the more resilient we can become. For this, we invite you to play a small game, and this will be to spend the day letting a coin toss determine what you do. For every activity that you have in the day, think of 2 things that you could do, and give each activity to each side of the coin. Then flip the coin, and whichever side of the coin lands up, that's the option you'll go with. There are times when this can make us feel uncomfortable, and that's kind of the point. But the more we're willing to get out of our own way and let ourselves be uncomfortable, the easier it becomes. Our last section is on welcoming change. Change is a natural part of life, and no matter how hard we fight it, change is going to happen. By preparing in advance, we're not taken by surprise when change does happen. When we resist and force things to be different, we lose precious time that could be used to grow and to act towards our values. We've already talked about how to manage failure, and it's important that we also learn how to manage success, because both of these things involve change. Some people tend to think that this is the end of the journey, that once they've achieved something, they'll stay there forever. We've already talked about how to manage failure, and it's also important to learn how to manage success. Some people think that once we've achieved success, this is the end of the journey, that once they've achieved something, they'll stay there forever. And whilst that might be true, whilst one success might be followed by another success, this isn't guaranteed, and that's okay. The key here is to realize that change is interwoven in the journey of success as well as the journey of failure. And success might be followed by plateau or failure, both of which are okay. We've already talked about how to manage failure, and it's also important to learn how to manage success. Some people think that this might be the end of the road, that once they've achieved something, that they'll stay there forever. And whilst this might be true, whilst one success might lead to another success, this also isn't guaranteed. Success might be followed by a plateau, it might be followed by failure, which is in turn followed by more success. The key here is to learn that change is involved in both success and failure, that it's a cycle and that that's okay. By holding success and failure lightly, we can be better prepared to manage both of them. learning lessons and acting in ways that are consistent with our values. The Stoics, the ancient philosophers, had an exercise called premeditatio malorum. In this exercise, they were able to anticipate various terrible things that could happen to them in the near future. This exercise has two main purposes. First is to train us to welcome change into our lives. And second is to make us appreciate what we currently have, but we don't always appreciate. To do this, we ask ourselves three main questions. What are all the terrible things that might happen? What would be the worst part of that? And how would you survive? Imagine in the next 24 hours, in the next week, and in the next year. According to the Stoics, a wise person knows that change is a natural part of life, and it's worthless to try and fight against it. The only thing we can do is to be ready for it when it occurs. A wise person also knows that our minds... Let's do that again. According to the Stoics, a wise person knows that change is a natural part of life, and therefore it's worthless to try and fight against it. The only thing we can do is be ready for it when it occurs. A wise person also knows that our minds tend to exaggerate how fragile we might be. We might be terrified of losing our job, our status, our relationship. But after the initial shock, most of us have a natural resilience to return to our average sense of well-being. The premeditatio malorum helps us be in touch with this capacity. We all wish that we could do things perfectly, but the truth is that nothing is ever going to be perfect all the time. So the secret is to recognize that it's okay for things not to be perfect. In Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, Susan Jeffers identifies that our greatest fear is that we can't handle what life throws us. So if we knew that we could handle anything that came our way, how would we start to approach change? Being resilient can change a lot of things in our lives. It can allow us to bounce back even when life has been tough. There are going to be plenty of times when we're presented with challenges that may seem unsurmountable at the time. And whilst we can't control some of these challenges, we can control how we react to them. And this is where our power lies. It takes time, and there'll be instances where it seems too tough. But with the right tools and the right mindset, you'll be able to make it happen. So in this course, we've looked at what resilience is. We've looked at the stress response and the importance of identifying emotions. We've looked at mindset, the difference between coping and thriving, understanding our inner resources, and knowing the values and creating meaning. We've looked at acceptance and self-acceptance. We've looked at discomfort and uncertainty. And finally, we're welcoming change. It's been an absolute pleasure to walk with you on this journey towards resilience, and we look forward to seeing you on the next course.